Jason Lowry stood on the tarmac beneath the blistering Texas sun, the weight of his gear pulling against his shoulders as he prepared to deploy for the fourth time. The air was thick with the familiar mix of jet fuel and unspoken goodbyes. He left behind not only the stretch of dry land he called home, but the quiet routines that had once made his life feel solid. Morning coffee on the porch, the hum of the lawnmower, the sight of Abby curled on the couch with a book. They had been married nearly 10 years. She knew the rhythms of military life. She had always managed while he was gone, and this time he had no reason to expect otherwise. Just a few weeks into his deployment in Jordan, an email from Abby arrived. She wrote that she'd found a refinancing option that would lower their monthly mortgage payments significantly. The paperwork was attached, simple forms, mostly boilerplate, and all she needed was his signature. Jason skimmed the pages between patrol rotations, barely registering the legal jargon. He signed where indicated and sent them back without hesitation. In his mind, Abby was doing what she had always done, handling things, protecting what they had built. He felt a surge of appreciation, even pride that she was keeping everything steady in his absence. Out there in the desert, surrounded by sand and silence, he never questioned her intentions. The signature was a small thing, a routine act of trust in a life built on distance and return. He didn't know that within those harmless-looking pages, choices had already been made. The ink he laid down from halfway across the world had opened a door he couldn't see, one that would soon be closed to him for good. What felt like partnership was, in truth, the first quiet fracture of something beginning to break. Jason returned home after 9 long months, expecting the familiar comfort of his own space. The scent of his wife's cooking wafting through the air, the soft hum of the fridge, the quiet peace of their suburban life. But when he arrived, the silence hit him like a punch to the gut. The driveway was empty, the gate stood closed, and the familiar click of the keypad code that should have opened the front door didn't happen. Confused, he walked up the path, expecting to see Abby standing there, waiting for him as she had so many times before. But there was no sign of her. Instead, a light inside the kitchen flickered on, casting an unfamiliar glow on the surroundings. Jason's heart raced as he knocked at the door, hoping for an explanation. But nothing prepared him for what happened next. A man in his late 40s emerged from the driveway, his face betraying a mixture of surprise and caution. Jason immediately recognized him as a stranger, yet something about him seemed oddly out of place. The man stopped a few feet away, eyeing Jason with a hesitant curiosity. Behind him, a woman in a loose-fitting bathrobe appeared, peering out with an expression that hovered between suspicion and confusion. "Did I get the address wrong?" Jason asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The woman, after a pause, slowly asked if he was sure this was his house. Jason showed her his identification, pointing to the house number on his ID. The words that followed felt like a cold slap to his face. "This house was bought a couple of months ago. We're the new owners." Jason stood frozen for a moment, his thoughts grinding to a halt. How could this be happening? His mind raced, the connection between the events of the past few weeks and this moment too blurry to piece together. His wife, Abby, she had promised to handle everything. She had told him in every letter, every email, that she was managing it all. But now this. Strangers in his home, living his life, in a place that was supposed to be his safe haven. He asked about the real estate agent, hoping for some sense of clarity. The man explained that they had worked with an agent in Austin who had facilitated everything, including the purchase. As the words sank in, Jason's heart pounded in his chest. His eyes moved over the house, his house, but it no longer felt like his own. The furniture had been rearranged, photos were gone from the walls, and the once familiar rooms seemed foreign. Every inch of the house felt like a betrayal. In the pit of his stomach, Jason realized that something had shifted. He had spent the last 9 months in a foreign land, fighting, serving, and yet, while he was away, his life had been sold to someone else. His home, his sanctuary, had been bought and claimed by people who knew nothing of the life he and Abby had built. The sense of grounding he had always taken for granted evaporated in an instant, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of disorientation. How had he not seen this coming? How had it all changed so quickly while he was absent? The woman stepped closer, offering an awkward smile, but Jason couldn't bring himself to return it. His mind raced, trying to piece together the gaps, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart without him even realizing. He turned away from the couple, his eyes scanning the street, his pulse still hammering in his ears. It was as if the life he had known had been ripped out from under him, and now there was no place to stand. His home, no longer his home, seemed to close in on him, trapping him in a world he didn't understand. The echoes of Abby's promises, the quiet reassurance of her letters, began to feel like a distant, fragile memory. What had happened in those months? How could he have been so far away and yet so utterly unaware of what was unfolding on the other side? Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The house, once full of life and memories, now felt like a cold shell, a place where he no longer belonged. And as he stood there, staring at the strangers in his driveway, a knot of dread twisted in his stomach. What else had changed while he was gone? What had Abby truly been hiding from him all along? Jason couldn't shake the feeling of disorientation that settled over him after the encounter with the strangers. His mind raced, struggling to make sense of what had happened while he was away. Abby, his wife, his partner, had vanished without a trace, and everything he thought he knew about their life together now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. He reached for his phone, hoping for some sort of connection, some indication that things could still be salvaged. But when he dialed Abby's number, he was met with the cold, empty tone of a disconnected line. Panic began to creep in. He tried again, the same result. She had been unreachable before, but this time it was different. It felt like she had disappeared completely, leaving nothing behind but a void. He searched through social media, hoping to find some sign of life, a message, a post, anything that could explain where she had gone. But there was nothing. Her profiles were gone, deleted as though she had never existed in those digital spaces. The silence of her absence pressed down on him, suffocating him. Desperation led him to the bank, hoping they could provide some answers, some explanation for the sudden disappearance of his wife and the house he had called home. The bank employee who assisted him was efficient, detached, and impersonal. After reviewing his documents, she informed him with a calm voice that he had in fact signed the papers that transferred the property to a new owner. The sale was official, and his signature appeared on every document. There was no mistake. Jason's world tilted on its axis. He had signed those papers, yes, but he had no memory of doing so. He couldn't recall ever agreeing to the sale, much less understanding what he was actually signing. The documents had been sent to him by Abby, and he had trusted her implicitly. But now in the sterile confines of the bank, the reality began to sink in. His trust had been betrayed, his signatures used against him. He felt like a character in a carefully orchestrated play, the plot unfolding around him without his knowledge or consent. As the employee continued speaking, Jason's mind wandered, trying to piece together the fragments of what had happened. He thought back to the emails, the phone calls, the promises Abby had made about handling everything while he was away. It had all seemed so simple, so normal. She had said that she was managing things, that she had everything under control. But what if she hadn't been managing anything at all? What if she had been preparing for this moment, setting up a web of lies and deceit while he was hundreds of miles away, fighting battles that had nothing to do with his life at home? He tried to recall the papers he had signed. He remembered the envelopes arriving in his inbox, the documents attached, all needing his approval. Abby had always handled their finances, and he trusted her completely. He thought nothing of it when she asked for his signatures on what appeared to be routine paperwork. But now the memory of those documents seemed more like a foggy, distant blur. The reality of what they had entailed was starting to hit him hard. The legal language, the official seals, the dates and signatures, it was all part of the illusion. It all appeared legitimate, but now he saw it for what it was, a carefully constructed trap. Jason's chest tightened as the weight of the situation pressed in on him. His trust had become his undoing. He had relied on Abby's promises, on her assurances that everything was being taken care of. But the truth was far more insidious. What had started as a simple act of faith had turned into a betrayal of the highest order. His signature, once a symbol of partnership, had been used as a weapon against him. And now, standing in the sterile lobby of the bank, Jason felt the crushing weight of what he had lost. Not just a house, but the life he had built with Abby, the future they had planned. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. Abby had planned this. She had orchestrated it all, and he had been blind to it. Every step, every detail had been carefully arranged while he was miles away, out of reach, in a foreign land. The silence, the disappearance, the sudden shift in their lives. It was all part of a larger scheme. And now the law, which he had always trusted to protect him, had become part of the deception. Jason left the bank in a daze, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just learned. His world had been turned upside down, and he was left to navigate a reality that no longer made sense. The line of silence between him and Abby had been drawn, and he could no longer ignore the void that separated them. The house, the marriage, the life they had built, everything was now in question. And as he stepped out into the street, the weight of his own trust and the betrayal that had followed it hung heavily on his shoulders. The first few weeks after Jason's return were a blur. He rented a cheap motel room, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with military uniforms and medals that once symbolized pride and accomplishment. His possessions, the remnants of his life, seemed distant and foreign in the sterile, dimly lit space. His home was gone, replaced by the coldness of a place that felt like a temporary stop rather than a refuge. The only connection he had to his past life was his phone, where photographs of his family were all that remained. But even those photos, once cherished, now felt like a cruel reminder of what he had lost. Jason had hired a lawyer, hoping for some clarity, but the legal reality was harsh and final. The house had been sold and every document had been signed, legally binding him to a fate he couldn't recall agreeing to. The lawyer confirmed it all with grim certainty. The sale had been conducted properly, and there was nothing left to dispute. It was as if his entire life, his home, his marriage had been erased in a single, clean transaction. The thought that Abby had done this without his knowledge, without his consent, twisted in his gut. It was a bitter pill he couldn't swallow, and it pushed him further into the depths of confusion and frustration. Determined to find answers, Jason started looking for Abby. He needed to understand what had happened, how everything had turned upside down so quickly. His first step was to visit her sister, Sarah. After a few tense meetings, Sarah finally revealed the truth. Abby, it seemed, had been involved with a real estate agent for some time, a man who had played a significant role in the sale of their home. This wasn't just about money, it was about something more, something darker. The agent had convinced Abby to cash out the value of the house, promising her a better future, one that didn't include Jason. As Jason listened to Sarah's words, a deep sense of betrayal washed over him. Abby hadn't just sold their house, she had sold their future, their shared dreams, and the life they had built together. The money from the sale had gone toward a new home, one in California, a place where Abby had started a new life, one without him. The concept of us had been replaced with her, and the house wasn't the only thing she had left behind. It was as though she had completely severed the ties that bound them, as if he had never existed in her plans for the future. Jason's mind raced as he processed this revelation. Anger bubbled up inside him, hot and searing. But it wasn't the kind of rage he had expected. It wasn't aimed at the agent, not even at the money, but at Abby. How could she do this? How could she so easily break the trust they had shared for so many years? He remembered the conversations they had before he left, the promises, the love they had spoken of, and it all felt like a lie now. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built his life with, had been planning this behind his back. He was nothing more than a casualty in her pursuit of a new life. But Jason didn't want revenge. The burning anger inside him was real, but it wasn't what drove him. What drove him now was a need to understand, to grasp how Abby had gone from the woman he thought he knew to the person who had discarded him without a second thought. What had changed? What had led her to make these decisions? And how had she allowed herself to be so easily swept away by the promises of someone else? As the days passed, Jason wrestled with these questions, trying to piece together the fragments of his past. His mind kept returning to the house that no longer belonged to him. It wasn't just a building, it was the physical manifestation of his life with Abby, the place where they had built their memories, their future. And now it was gone, taken from him by the woman he had trusted more than anyone else. Jason wasn't sure what he expected to find as he pieced together these shattered remnants of his past. Maybe he thought he would find some answer, some key that would explain everything. But all he found was more confusion, more questions that only deepened his sense of loss. Abby had made a choice, and now he was left to navigate the aftermath, trying to rebuild something from the broken pieces of a life that no longer existed. As the investigation continued, Jason found himself sinking deeper into the web of deceit that had shattered his life. His days were consumed with questions, frustrations, and a growing need to understand how everything had unfolded. He began searching for answers in places he hadn't thought to look before. Through a contact in financial management, he was able to obtain copies of the original documents that he had signed during the refinancing process. As he carefully examined them, Jason's heart sank further. There on the papers he had signed in blind trust was his signature, clear and unmistakable. But it was accompanied by a subtle, nearly invisible annotation that he hadn't noticed before. The note transferred the rights to sell the house to a third party. It wasn't a standard clause. It wasn't something that should have been there. This was a manipulation, a trick commonly used in fraudulent schemes. It was a clever ruse, buried in the fine print, designed to escape scrutiny until it was too late. Jason felt a chill run through him as he pieced the details together. The real estate agent, the man Abby had been involved with, had used this tactic before. It wasn't just an isolated incident. He had a history of exploiting vulnerable individuals, particularly women married to military personnel. The distance between them, the reliance on trust, and the apparent security of a spouse's signature, all of these elements made it easier for the agent to carry out his schemes without raising suspicion. Jason wasn't the first man to be caught in this trap, and it was clear that he wouldn't be the last. As he dug deeper, Jason began to uncover a disturbing pattern. Other women, some of them wives of service members stationed overseas, had also fallen victim to the same agent. They too had been manipulated by the same deceptive tactics that took advantage of the physical and emotional distance between them and their husbands. These women had trusted the wrong people, just as Jason had trusted Abby. It became evident that his story was not unique. It was part of a larger, insidious pattern of exploitation. Jason didn't know what to do with this information at first. He wasn't looking to expose Abby in a public spectacle or take revenge. What he wanted was something more elusive: justice. The truth was, he needed to understand how this had happened, how someone he had loved and trusted could have been swept away so easily. But there was more to this than just his personal heartbreak. There was a systemic issue at play, one that affected others like him. And if he could uncover the full extent of it, perhaps he could prevent others from falling into the same trap. He reached out to the other victims, people whose lives had also been turned upside down by the same agent's manipulations. Some of them were hesitant at first, unsure of whether they could trust Jason. But as they shared their stories, he began to see the full scope of the damage that had been done. Some had lost homes, others had lost entire families, all because of a fraudulent scheme that preyed on their vulnerability. They had been left in the wake of broken promises and shattered lives, much like Jason had been. Jason began compiling the evidence. It wasn't for a court case or legal battle, at least not yet. It was for something more important: the truth. He gathered emails, documents, records of transactions, and testimonies from the other victims. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and Jason felt a growing determination. He was no longer just a man trying to piece his own life back together. He had become an advocate for those who had been wronged in the same way, even if they hadn't realized it yet. In the quiet of his motel room, surrounded by boxes and papers, Jason worked tirelessly. He wasn't doing this for vengeance or to make a public spectacle of Abby. What he sought was something deeper: accountability. This was about exposing the lies that had been hidden behind legal documents and false promises. It was about holding the people responsible for this network of deceit accountable for their actions, so that no one else would have to endure the same heartbreak and betrayal. As the days wore on, Jason felt a growing sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't just fighting for his own life, he was fighting for the truth. And for the first time in months, he felt like he was taking control of his own destiny. 6 months after everything fell apart, Jason found himself settling into a small house nestled at the foot of the Colorado mountains. It was far from the life he had once known, far from the memories of his past. The house was modest, bare, devoid of the furniture, portraits, and familiar comforts that had once filled a home. This new space was empty in more ways than one, yet it held a sense of peace that Jason hadn't experienced in a long time. The shadows of betrayal that had haunted him in Texas were distant now, and with each passing day, he was finding his way out of the emptiness that had consumed him. The walls of the house were clean and untouched, just like the life he was trying to build. There was no room for the ghosts of the past here, no place for the lies that had unraveled his marriage. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild from the ground up. The quiet of the mountains, the solitude of the area, offered a reprieve from the noise of his previous life. It wasn't much, but it was his, and for the first time in months, he felt a small spark of hope. Jason had found a job teaching at the local school, instructing young boys in the basics of military training. He taught them how to stand tall, how to carry themselves with discipline and respect. It was a far cry from the chaos he had known, but there was something rewarding in the simplicity of it. He instilled in them a sense of duty, of honor, of the importance of checking things for themselves, of questioning the world around them. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Trust had been broken, not just by Abby, but by the world that had promised him stability and certainty, only to take it all away. Each lesson he gave felt like a small step towards healing. He didn't need to look back at the mistakes of his past anymore. The boys he taught didn't need to know about his failures or the heartbreak he had endured. They didn't need to know about the house he'd once shared with Abby or how it had all been taken from him in a moment of betrayal. That chapter was closed, and as he stood in front of the class, he realized that he wasn't just teaching them. He was teaching himself too. He no longer searched for Abby, no longer tried to piece together the fragments of a life that had been shattered. She had become a distant figure, a false road on a map that had once promised a future. Now she was nothing more than a memory, one he had to let go of in order to move forward. The news stories that occasionally crossed his path, stories of real estate scams, and the kinds of manipulations he had fallen victim to, didn't bother him as much anymore. He knew he wasn't the only one who had lost a home, who had come back from war to find that everything had changed in his absence. There were others like him, others who had been deceived, but Jason had learned that there was nothing to be gained from dwelling on those stories. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what came next. In Colorado, Jason found a new kind of peace. It wasn't the kind that came from a perfect life or the absence of pain. It was the peace that came from accepting the truth, from understanding that some things were beyond his control. He had no illusions about the future, but he had found a new rhythm, a new way of living that was honest and grounded. There was no room for deceit here, no room for betrayal. His life was simple, but it was real. The house, though small and empty, was his sanctuary. The silence that surrounded it wasn't a void, but a space where he could breathe, reflect, and grow. He didn't need the trappings of the past to define him anymore. The walls were just walls, and the life he was building was one he could trust. It was a life without lies, without false promises. It was a life that was slowly becoming whole again, one small step at a time. Jason didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was no longer afraid of it. The pain of the past would always be a part of him, but it no longer controlled him. He was learning to live in the present, to trust himself and the world around him. And in that quiet house at the foot of the mountains, Jason found the beginnings of something he hadn't thought possible: peace.